Hey, we're back with Professor Avram Elliott, Social Civilizational Diagnostics. This time we have a guest all the way from Brooklyn, New York, Professor Ari Nagel.
Professor Ari Nagel, it's good to see you again. Welcome to Tel Aviv.
Yeah, it's so good to be back.
Ari, you have such an expose over a certain type of person, mainly women who want to give birth to a child, single mothers. They can be lesbian and they can be of every cross type of personality. And you visit them and you spend time and you see their families, and this is already quite well documented. But I would like to understand the perspective of a person that has your insight on other subjects. So maybe we can start with a subject like caring for the individual, extending help. For example, can I ask, if someone fell in front of you and you were busy, you needed to get to work or something, what would you do?
My experience throughout life is that the more I've helped people, I've gotten it back exponentially. When I could give just countless examples, including just helping women have children, I end up getting back so much more in return. I'm here visiting Israel. Got to see my 3 kids. Of course, I didn't really pay for this vacation. I was able to get my flight covered. I didn't even need to ask. I've been traveling around to over 10 countries last month, and more often than not, I'm getting picked up at the airport, and I'm getting taken to somebody's home, and I'm getting hosted, and they're thanking me for coming. And I remember when I used to travel, and I traveled quite a bit in my 20s. I probably hit more than 40 countries by the time I was 25. And, when I sat down and landed in a city, I had to make my own way. I didn't have a local. There's no better way to travel. But that's just only a small aspect. I think inevitably, anytime I've given to anyone, I've always gotten it back in abundance. Whether it's love, I've gotten the love back in abundance, or in favors and hosting. And I feel just very, very blessed. The more I help people, the more I feel like I'm the one that's ended up being blessed.
And what about...
But, there's exceptions. Sometimes I see someone coming from the, and the elevator doors are closing, and I don't hit the door open button. Sometimes I pretend to hit the door open button, like, oh, I got it, but really, I don't got time for that, they can, but sometimes after I get to my floor, I'll hit the lobby button, so I'll send the elevator back down for them. Yeah. Or I pretend like I'm going to hold the door, so I'm not always giving,
And is what is the mechanism that causes one to feel that they should give? Is it guilt? Or is it conscience? Or is it a sense of obligation?
It's interesting because, nobody questions anyone's motivation when they're giving charity, right? Why people give charity? They worked hard and earned that money, but more often than not, extremely wealthy people, they leave their money to charity. What else are they going to do with it? They just make an endowment. A lot of times the trend now is not to give it after they're dead. They like to give it when they're alive. They like to give it with a warm hand, not a cold hand. No one questions their motivation. And then once I was a match for someone and they needed my stem cells and my bone marrow and I was helping them, nobody questioned my motivation for that. But all the time people are questioning my motivation when I'm helping other families grow. And they're like, well, what's that? Why are you doing that? What do you get out of it? Probably the same thing anyone gets out of helping anybody. I think you get a lot of joy knowing that you were able to improve somebody's life.
Right. And is that a natural thing, or is that something which is learned or cultivated? Helping.
I don't think it's hereditary. I don't see my folks helping too many people. My mother doesn't love hosting strangers. You know? So it's not an hereditary thing, but
you come from a professional family. That means in the profession, in the culture, is that of extending and helping.
I certainly see that in a lot of my siblings. They have open homes where everyone's always welcome, including me and strangers. Very often I'll go to one of my siblings for a Shabbat, and they have, some wacky people show up,
So what is the mechanism of kindness? What, is there a mathematics to kindness? Is that you say that kindness just pays better dividends? Is that it?
That's been my personal experience.
And so,
of course, that's not a very good sample size. I think we would have to expand the sample size and see if that's the case. But that's not the reason I'm doing it, I think ultimately if you're doing someone a favor with the expectation of returns, inevitably you'll be disappointed, I suppose. But if you do it for altruistic reasons, I think more often than not you'll get it back.
And just
I'm not batting 1,000, plenty of people I've hosted and it didn't quite work out, but I think I enjoyed helping them, and that was the maybe benefit I received. It's not always where they're rehosting you, right? So you're not always getting it back in the same manner as you give it, but sometimes just the act of giving was the benefit. You've been nothing but a wonderful host to me. I've never had the opportunity to ever reciprocate, but somehow you continue to host me.
Well, I mean, that's interesting because I find that I gain so much more even though I host you. So
But
the
that's my
insight
point.
is so much so incredible. The access to what I call exotic coordinates is just so incredible, and a window into a life of situations which they're not necessarily interesting for me, but even if they were interesting, they would be completely inaccessible. So, and then how you translate it into a vernacular, into something understandable. So
I think that could probably prove beneficial to you in your lectures. Maybe tone it down a little bit into the vernacular, like the title, or just your lectures in general. I think you could bring it down to expand to a wider audience. Maybe use the vernacular.
really. And you're a social person, so what do you think it is that is social? What makes someone social?
I hear a lot of people often describe themselves as antisocial, but I certainly never saw them that. Sometimes it's people that just love to schmooze and chat it up. We have a mutual friend, Jake. He always describes himself as antisocial, but of course, I'm sure when you met him, he didn't stop talking, right? Right? So, I think sometimes people identify as a certain type, but in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. I think inherently humans just like to be social.
Do you think that humanity is going to change in the 21st century?
I have no doubt. I think we've been changing throughout the history of time.
And how? Be wild.
Well,
let's up it up a few years.
Be
wild.
I was just in Belgium, and when I was in Belgium, I went to the supermarket, and the supermarket was in a church. Then I went to the health club, and the health club was in a church as well. I went to a really nice restaurant, and the restaurant was in a gorgeous church. So here you had all these houses of worship, magnificent houses of worship, where people used to go to pray. I guess it was the TV of the time, because you would be going to look at the beautiful art that was displayed there, and the beautiful stained glass windows, and the beautiful architecture. nobody's really using that in Belgium anymore. It's not a very religious country. I don't think there's anyone going to use these churches. So they were going into a state of disrepair, and they had to maintain them. And one way that they sought to maintain them was then they repurposed them. So I certainly think that's been a trend, is the religion is not playing as central of a role as it once did. It was, I think, overwhelmingly, all these empires were all basically with the sole purpose of spreading faith. And I think now that that's gone, I think it will dissipate, and maybe, I think that's going to change in so many ways.
Right. So how will it divide?
Well, that's the thing. I think that's another change that should be happening over the coming centuries. I think there's going to be less divisions. You already see these trends. You have the European Union, where these countries that were at war, unfathomable to think that they'd be allies, let alone using a singular currency and having, a community where they're just one larger. Of course, economics, I think, was the main purpose, but I think ultimately in the end, the students are studying in all these other countries. The trend, I think, will be that eventually they will merge. What's interesting on my flight over because I was flying from Argentina to Amsterdam last month, and a woman sitting next to me was from Canada. And I said, the U.S. and Canada, we should just merge already. We're basically the same. She's like, what? Nothing could be farther from the truth. Culturally, we're so different. And I tried to get her to give me examples. She was like, well, on the environment, we're much more environmentally conscious. She rattled off a whole bunch of examples. And I said, you know what? I have more in common with you living in Toronto than I do with someone in Montgomery, Alabama. And you have a lot more in common with me than you do with someone living in Thunder Bay, Canada. And I think that somehow we were much more connected on so many levels culturally than she was with her own fellow citizens.
What is value to you? Let me ask you a question abstractly. What is value?
Yeah, I think in the end, my bank account doesn't have much value.
So what is value?
And then, of course, I have a lot of children, but ultimately, in the end, there's no real inherent value in just the act of having children. I think, in the end, what I'd like for my children is really just for their happiness. And if that's the case, then I think happiness would be the real value.
Yes.
I think that you have people very, very wealthy that would probably trade it all just to be happy, right?
And
seems, I guess, somewhat shallow, right? Is that the purpose of life, to be happy? But I don't know if that's the purpose, but certainly I think that's the value.
And what about community and co-creativity and creativity in general? If it had not been for your preoccupation with fertilizing, would you be satisfied in your job? How would you be creative? Perhaps in your over-fertilization, you are expiating, taking out all your drive, your creative drive, and not expressing yourself creatively. Do you have a creative side?
Well, I guess rethinking the different types of families that I can help create certainly helps me explore my creative side. Trying to learn how to get along with all these different types of families helps me explore my creative side, and then my job does allow me to encounter 100 different students each semester and helping educate them.
You here,
please.
About your exploring your creative side, getting along with different people. Tell me, like, different psychological postures that are required that you go through in order to accommodate and to get along with?
Listen, you could always do better, okay? I'm not batting 1,000, but, with my 55 children's mothers, I have, I think, a very close, loving relationship with, I would say, 50 of them. I think ultimately, in the end, there's only so, you can't please all the people all the time. So you can't stress out about the ones that you can't please. I think ultimately, in the end,
could you take me
you
through?
do the best you can.
Can you take me through like a walk in the park, like you're guiding someone from there? What would you need to do, without being specific, without naming anything, and without getting into a biography, but really in an abstract way? What would you need to do to accommodate one person?
I think you need to approach it in an abstract way. I think you don't need to be right. Okay, you don't say, "Well, I need to do the right thing." Don't do the right thing. You have to look at your goals and see what you want and see what's important, and then try and think of ways that you could accomplish that. And maybe saying what you think is the right thing to say isn't the best way to accomplish that. You need to tell people what they need to hear, and you're not doing it to please them, but sometimes you can do that to accomplish your own goals and what's important to you. Choose your battles, certainly, and then try and focus on the things that are really important to you, and then try and approach the problem and tell the other party what they would want to hear so that you could accomplish your goals. It could be a challenging thing to do.
Is that a rule, or is that one rule?
How do you mean?
Is this the way to get on? Not to say what one thinks?
When you want to accomplish your goals, then you try and implement a plan that would help you accomplish those goals. You're not saying what you think. You're trying to act in such a way that would help you accomplish what's important to you. Anyway, in those scenarios, I think you telling how you feel isn't always the best approach. You giving your opinion, or maybe getting into an argument and sharing your side of the story, well, that's not really what they want to hear. I think more often than not, I'll try and repeat their point of view before I even talk about mine, just so that they understand that I know where they're coming from. So, if you're having a dispute with one of my children's mothers, and she shares her point of view, the first thing I always do is I'll just share that point of view back with her, saying, I see what you're trying to say, and then repeat all those points that they made, whether they're valid or not. And just so that she hears me empathizing with her, and that I understand her. I think that's a big part of it. Of course, it's easy to get along when I basically allow them to make all the decisions. So what's most important to me is obviously the children, and sometimes me fighting for what I think is right, or for what I think I want. What I really want is just what's in the best interest of the children, and I think that maybe what I'm arguing for is not as important as me getting along with the mother. That, to me, would trump more, almost everything, right? Because when you have a child and that child loves these two people more than anything in the world, well, I don't think that child really wants to see the parents argue, right? So I think it's important, not because I want to please the mother, but I think it's important because it's in the best interest of the child that I get along. So, and that's so important to me that I'll be willing to maybe overlook almost anything else, because I know that's what's best.
And where do you draw that ability to put yourself into other people's perspectives?
What do you mean?
Where do you learn to? So what I really wanted to know is, how do you extricate yourself from an emotional circumstance and then constructed in a rational way based on don't you get caught up in emotion, and if not, what mental exercise is it that you play to be able to not get caught up in the emotion, considering that it relates to your children and relates to people that you're in contact with?
Yeah, certainly. It's that love for my children that I think will drive me to act in a more rational manner.
Well, what is it that you do? Like, what mental
Well,
exercise?
if you're focusing on the love of your children and doing what's best for them, and then you realize that maybe a calm, thoughtful, rational answer is probably what's best for the mother. And very often than not, what's best for the mother is going to be better for the child, because you don't want the mom to be stressed out. That's not going to be beneficial for her being a good mom. So ultimately, in the end, I think it's that love for your child, even if you don't care for the mother as much as you need to. I think just knowing that you love your child, you want the mother to be stress-free, and I think that allows you to act in a more rational way.
Well,
especially if you're focusing on your goals. It's rare circumstances where letting your emotions get the better of you is going to somehow solve that issue. Stressing out about the issue, I think, is helpful in very, very rare circumstances of certain types of dangers. Maybe the stress can save you, but certainly not in arguing or most situations in life. I don't think the stress is helping.
Would you? I'm thinking what may possibly have happened with you is that when you first had your first child, or second or third child, and it was outside of a marital structure, you got deeply probably stressed or concerned, and when you couldn't see your children, or when you had limitations and you realized that you would not be the family person that you have come from and where most of your references are, you also reacted in a way to hypercompensate for the trauma of being taken away from your family, from your children, and you probably had many children. Is that so? Because how is it that you decided to have you must have been in some way affected by your earlier relationships to have made it that that distance from your children will no longer hurt you? It suggests that possibly you have been hurt, and your reaction to it was a hyper emotional reaction, that you decided to have many, many children so you'd be immune from the feelings towards or the attachment to just one child.
That's certainly a byproduct, I think. Maybe that was, one would argue, a benefit to having so many children is that if for any reason I lost visitation or custody, which happens, and sometimes the vast majority of the moms want me to play a role. Some of them don't. Some of them prefer if I have no contact with the child. Of course, it's dynamic, so sometimes they change, and then they say, okay, you know what, now we would like you to have a relationship with the child. And then it works both ways. Sometimes I have a very close relationship with the child, and then the mother changes her mind and says, no, I want you to have no relationship. A lot of times it's often dependent on the relationships that they're having. Sometimes I had a woman just 2 months ago that had a boyfriend, and then they broke up, so now she said, you know what, I want you to play a more active role in the child's life. So it changes and it varies. But that certainly wasn't the driver of me having a lot of children. For me, I think I loved my first child so much, and knowing that I could bring that kind of love and that kind of joy to someone else, I think was the motivation for me. And none of the mothers kept the children from me and caused me any kind of trauma. Of course, it was to the contrary. More often than not, they wanted me to spend more and more time with the child. I wasn't spending so much time with the children as I started to expand, so a lot of times they're very happy for the time that I'm able to give them. And what's interesting is that some of the moms, so many of the moms, you're an amazing dad, and I'll post that on social media, what an amazing dad, and I know it's not true. I'm not an a better father to your son. I think their expectations were lower, because they already knew how many children I had, and I think, but I don't even think that's it either. I think ultimately it's 90% of it's in the eye of the beholder.
What do you mean?
It's the
90% of the time, this is an important statement.
Yes, 90% of the time it has nothing to do with my actions.
What has it got to do with?
It's the mother sees people in a positive light. The mother's a good person and has a good heart, and they see me doing the best I can. They will just sing my praises. And then you could have another mother where I'm acting the exact same way, but thinks that I'm the worst, the evil devil that ever, was planted on earth, right? So I'm the exact same person for both of these mothers. I'm the exact same father. I'm the exact same. I act the same. I behave the same. The difference is their perceptions.
What do you do with mood changes?
Yeah, well, certainly you have that, right? You have the cyclical mood changes once a month, and then sometimes you have something a little more challenging if there's a type of bipolar disorder or things like that, and those are challenging. I think the first thing you need to do is you need to accept that it's more often than not physiological. It's something that, as much as they'd like to, they probably can't control it. You try and remember the times when they're not moody and understand that it's just a phase that will pass, and you wait it out. Yeah, because you know that they're not like that all the time. You know about the times that they're pleasant and kind and all the redeeming qualities.
You're with so many people, women that you don't love. How do you find the human relationship with them? You may not necessarily like them, or do you learn to like them, or do you appreciate and honor and respect everybody? How do you sort of manage your intimacy?
Yeah, well, certainly there's not the romantic relationship. There's not the intimacy, but there's a lot of love, most definitely. I think even if we're not that close, I know what they're doing every single day, day in and day out for my children. That certainly allows me to extend a tremendous amount of love towards them and appreciation. I think it goes both ways. Maybe I'm not there for them, and I think they still have a lot of love for me because they know that without me they wouldn't have their baby girl or they wouldn't have their baby boy. And I think they love their child so much that I think they sometimes see a little of me in their child, and because of that they're so loving and appreciative towards me. It also helps that we don't have any bad memories. More often than not, with around 50 of the moms, I don't think we've had one disagreement, not even one fight. We've never had any issue, ever. So I think there's no bad memories to
What do you think is
rehash.
the cause for family disintegration, for divorce, and for separation of couples?
I'm not. Is that a new phenomenon? I mean, I guess divorce was illegal at a certain point, and maybe they were just more afraid. I think in some ways it could be beneficial. Obviously, if two people hate each other, I'm not quite sure it's beneficial for them to be staying together and having a child grow up in that environment.
What is an ideal family structure or group structure or reproduction structure for society?
Well, that's the thing. I think that there is no one structure that works for everybody. I think a lot of these women that I helped, they operate much better as a single mother, not having to share holidays and share custody. And then you have others where they don't want to have a child unless they have a partner, because they feel like society expects that and they don't want their child to be different. So it's changing. Society certainly accepts, obviously a husband and wife, and in most places now, the two moms are fully accepted. Very often, two dads are accepted. I think society's now learning to accept two moms and a dad, which is more common. I don't think there's really going to be an issue of bullying or any kind of issues where they are viewed as different. I think kids want to fit in, and I don't really think that'll be a challenge in whatever family makeup that works for them. I think there's enough single mothers out there that they won't feel too different. Although, of course, there are sometimes Father's Day events at school, but schools are getting better and better at allowing grandpas to attend or grandmas to attend, and not making it very specific as maybe it was growing up, where we had father-son baseball games.
Out of curiosity, what do you think about the position of men as carers of their children, as even sole carers of their children?
I think ultimately, in the end, the more people that you have loving the child, I think in the end is always the best, most ideal situation.
Do you think men are capable of extending the same love and looking after?
I think they both bring different things to the table, but most definitely, of course.
Do you think a man can play the same role as a woman in taking complete care? In other words, even in custody battles, that in an equitable court, they may say, well, the man gets custody over the woman, and the man would be perceived as completely more capable, or not that it should be exclusive. It probably shouldn't.
I think ultimately probably has very little to do with the capability of either party. That's not how they decide custody battles. I don't think they look at who's more capable and then that's who should have the child. I would probably say the highest correlation of where the child goes is probably who had the better lawyer. I would look at the correlation of the amount the lawyer charges and then who won custody, and I bet you there'd be a high correlation of that. I mean, whoever you could afford the best lawyer will ultimately put their best foot forward and more than likely win custody.
What is custody dependent on that? A lawyer and the fees paid make the difference.
Having a better lawyer will help you win the case.
Why? What is the case dependent on?
They're just going to say the right things and explain why they're the better parent. This is what they do for a living, so they're gonna know exactly